I think is really interesting. Obviously it worked. To convince a consumer to make a specific trip to go buy a cell phone, that seems like the non-obvious path forward.
Amazon's eating everybody's lunch. I think last year there was $4 billion of blue light purchases on Amazon. There are people who have risk thresholds that allow them to suffer the lows and experience the highs. The harder that he works, the luckier that he gets. I was willing to work harder than other people. Affluence was really the main thing that was missing.
Another data point that shows around your desire and willingness to serve and your focus on giving back, and I just think it speaks to your attitude in general.
The business started in 2001 with a few $100,000 a year in revenue. And then when I left in 2019, it was just over $1 billion in revenue. As you get later in life, money becomes less of a utility, and the relationships that you've forged in your life and the memories that you have are more important.
Jason, thanks for joining, man. Really glad to meet you in person, and stoked you're here today. The podcast always starts the same way. Where are you from?
Great. Well, I was born and raised in Rapid City, South Dakota.
Okay. But you're not still in Rapid City, South Dakota, right? So you ended up leaving at some point.
Yeah, and when I say raised, I mean just my early years. So I left South Dakota, moved to Utah when I was 10.
Okay.
But those first 10 years were in Rapid City.
10 years in Rapid City. And have you been back to Rapid City since then, by chance?
Yeah, several times. Lots of family still there.
Is it, I mean, so the time you left Rapid City and the time that I went, there's a good distance of time there, but is it still a lot the same? When I went to Rapid City, I remember we landed our airplane at like, I don't know, it was after dark, and it felt like they turned the lights off in that place. Like there was like, it was really nice, but it was a quaint city, I can call it. It was not a, yeah.
Yeah, it's grown a lot since. I mean, it's kind of a tourist destination, being in the Black Hills and Mount Rushmore, and there's several tourist destinations around there. So it's certainly grown over the years. It's a great community.
Yeah, I could see that. People super nice, and I could see the sense of community being strong there. Did you ever? Were you in the outdoors when you were younger? I mean, I think you enjoy it now, but did you spend some time? Specifically, I was thinking I went and did a quick, not even a tour, but we went and checked out a little bit in the Needles, and I thought this would be an amazing place to explore. And I don't know, did you spend any time outside when you were there?
Yeah, we spent quite a bit of time outside. I mean, although we lived in the city of Rapid City, my aunts and uncles all had ranches, and so we spent quite a bit of time working on those. And then hunting was just part of the family culture that I grew up in there. And so we hunted every deer season, and we spent a lot of time outside.
It's buffalo country, right? Or not buffalo? He has a bison. My 10-year-old man, every time I bring up, Dad, if it's in America, there's no buffalo in America. It's only bison. Okay. So Mallory, that's for you. Did you, but you're hunting deer. You answered the question. Never mind. All right. So you moved when you were 10, you came here to Salt Lake, and what brought you to Salt Lake?
My dad's career he was a diesel mechanic.
Right on.
And he worked for a company at the time. It was called Holman Diesel in Rapid City, and they were acquired by another company, and they downsized the roles. So ultimately, it was job loss for my father that led him to seeking out different opportunities for our family, and he ended up with the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, as a snowcat mechanic here in Salt Lake City.
That's kind of cool. Be a snowcat mechanic, actually. You were 10 years old, so I don't know how much you're involved in that process, but I'm just thinking back, like that would be a little bit of a complexity to even find a job in a different state in late 80s.
Yeah, late 80s.
I mean, is this like a newspaper ad situation or?
Yeah, I mean, likely newspaper ad and, quite a bit of networking, whatever you could do there. But yeah, this was not the age of the World Wide Web. So
yeah, that's a little complex. That's interesting. So, all right. So he gets a job, comes here, and you land. And what was the culture shock like when you showed up at your, sixth grade, seventh grade when you moved here?
Yeah, moved between fifth and sixth grade.
Okay, between fifth and sixth. So you show up first day, sixth grade. I mean, was there some culture shock there for you?
Yeah, I mean, look, when you grow up around your family, first cousins, aunts, uncles, there's a lot of comfort around that. It was the only thing that I knew was being in South Dakota. So, moving here was more of almost everything, more people, more diversity, more religious influence. There's a lot to take in as a 10-year-old kid.
Yeah.
When you're trying to kind of find your place.
It's a hard time. I mean, here's what I'm thinking. I remember I moved to Salt Lake, but not from South Dakota, but I moved from rural Idaho. And it was a farming country, a similar area where you moved. And I remember showing up to Northwest Middle School, man, and being like, I stood out so bad. I mean, was there like a little bit of a process trying to fit in there for you as a kid, or?
Yeah, I mean, thankfully we moved in the summer, so I had a little bit of an adjustment period to see what kids around me were doing. And I have an older brother who is a few years older than me, and so he was, keenly aware, and we went to the same school that first year. So that was all helpful.
Dude, thank goodness for good older brothers, man.
Yeah, no kidding,
man. All right, so you made it through. You made it through those times, and you ended up, So to talk me through what happened after that.
Well, I mean, it was a big transition for our family.
Yeah.
I'd look back at there are moments in life where, those are inflection points. And that was certainly one for me. And I had no influence on that decision. So that was something I was given more than something that I chose. But for my parents, that was a very difficult decision. We moved here literally in the back of my dad's Ford truck. And he went to the junkyard and cut the truck bed off of another truck and made it into a trailer. It's a very Beverly Hillbillies style look. We've got some funny photos that we laugh at today, but it was 2 trips like that. And, we moved our whole family. We were living in a trailer house in Rapid City. We moved to a really small house in Rose Park and, began adjusting. Outside of myself, when I think back to what it would be like to be a parent, they moved away from all of their friends, their social network, their family, all of their support system. And clearly we didn't have a lot of money at that time. So, they were really, really focused on just putting food on the table. Really hard, unselfish decision, I would say. And, I was very tearful, obviously leaving, but, we created a new life here in Utah, and my parents were stable through the whole thing. It's incredible.
That is incredible. It's incredible that there's, so you mentioned that your parents were stable through the whole thing, and that seems like it was pretty impactful because, right? I mean, your world is completely changing around you, but I mean, how was that? That seems like there's something to that. Is that right? Is that like just having that stability at home with your mom and dad, just being there always?
Yeah, I think that, at least for me, and I would say that probably works across, a lot of people, that stability at home is actually an advantage.
Yeah.
And even if it's not economic stability, if it's just, parents that love you, that are strong together, that love each other. And my parents were all of those things. I mean, in their toughest moments, they were their best. And, we saw them just work really hard together to keep just making our lives better. And, that included tough parenting and different role changes for them. And their lives were pretty wild when I think about it in hindsight as well.
Yeah. Tell me what you mean by that. Their lives were wild in hindsight, just in what they were dealing with as parents, or, packing up the kids and.
Yeah. Collectively, all of the things. So, packing up and moving hard, I think I don't even dare, I should ask them how much money that they actually had saved at that point in their life, but it was, I'm going to guess, $1,000 or so, maybe $1,500. It was not a lot. And then you get here and, there's all these other dynamics where I have an older brother and a little sister. So there's 3 of us that need to get to school. And, we lived in a house with 1 bathroom. So my dad was up early and showered and out of the house before most of us were awake. My mom worked. She ended up going back to school to Weber State.
Wow.
While I was in middle school to get her teaching degree. And she worked at the local grocery store. So, her mornings of getting both my brother and I and my little sister out the door, herself to school, then to work. And then, of course, we weren't eating out. So, like proper meal planning for the family on a budget. It's stressful.
Yeah.
Stressful to even talk about it.
You know what I was thinking about, man, is like, just think of the energy required, the energy output to accomplish all of that for your mom. That's amazing. That's, wow. And that's also like, not like all of those things are like they're all like long-term strategically smart, but man, that's a lot to be thinking about, grinding out through college and raising 3 kids in a new place and working a job at the local grocery. That's impressive.
Yeah.
Have you talked to your folks at all about kind of how they approached each other during that time? Like you mentioned how they were strong together, and I think that's crucial. I don't know anything about anything from relationships, but I think that's important, man. And I don't know, that's also freaking hard, you know? Like,
yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I don't know that I've ever directly asked them, how they stood fast together. But what I can tell you is from my perspective, and I think from my siblings would say the exact same thing, is there were no secrets in my house. So, in the sense that, if my mom caught us doing something or my dad, they shared. My parents were on the same page at all times. So I learned that, like, as now a parent, there was no silos. The other thing that I learned is that they stuck to the game plan together. Mm-hmm. So none of them went off the budget path. They had a family plan of how money would be spent, where it would be earned, and none of them had, vices, whether it was drugs, alcohol, any of those sort of things that took away from that. So they were just, they were diligent together and made, a lot of sacrifices. And then I'd say probably like one of the most impactful things for me was just watching when my dad would get home from work and my mom would be home, possibly in between, potentially going back to work. The first thing he did every day was give my mom the biggest hug. And, like the way he loved her and still does was impactful.
That's cool. You mentioned how there was a family plan and there were no secrets and they were always working together on that. Would you say this was more of the family plan? Is this more of like a material plan, like an actual plan, like here's what we're working on? Or is this more of like an ideology, or both?
The budget was an actual budget.
Okay.
And my mom would be able to tell you exactly how much money she had to spend on groceries every single week and how they were covering tuition and how they managed, things that we needed, playing sports, all that stuff costs money. And so, my mom was pretty diligent about how they put together a budget and spent money in particular, as is no secret to you or anyone listening. Financial stress can be a really significant contributor to a lot of problems in life. And one way that they manage that is they just very much lived within their means.
Yeah, that's smart. Sounds like your parents were smart folks. The reason I asked the question about the plan and the alignment is because and we're getting ahead. We can come back here in a minute, but we're getting ahead from a timeline perspective. I'm getting ahead from a timeline perspective. But the thing that I'm thinking of in my mind is I'm comparing this, no secrets, everyone's aligned on the path forward, to a story that I read or heard from you about when you were one of your early businesses, how you brought all your founders together and got them all aligned on a mission and vision and why that was important. And I wonder if there's any connectivity between those two things. If this idea of being aligned, if that comes from that root or if it's somewhere else.
I think it's a great question, and it's likely rooted there. Okay. And thankfully, I had other founders that wanted to do something similar. So, I can't take full credit for that, but I did, I think that we did treat our companies very kind of like family oriented, shared vision oriented. And those are things that worked for us.
Fair enough. I like that you said when you treated your companies like family oriented, because, and I don't know how you feel about this. I'd love your perspective on it, but I hear people say like, oh, when you talk about this, like, we're a family. And I don't think that most companies are family. Unless you're actually family, you're probably really not family, And I one of my personal pet peeves is they say, we're a family at work. Unlikely. But I don't know, is that, but also, frankly, everyone who listens to this, and you also know, I've also never ran a company. So maybe I'm thinking about this all wrong. I don't know. Was that intentionally kind of that thought of like family oriented, but separating the two?
Yeah. I think all businesses can be different.
Sure.
And I think times have certainly changed in the business world from when I was getting started in some of these early companies. But ours was intentional. I mean, we had a song that one of our founders, I think, used to use in his family. But for Spring Mobile, the song lyrics started with, "We are the Spring family. We're happy as can be. We're always having lots of fun. We're kind to each and every one." Anyway, it was kind of a cheesy little limerick, but the idea was getting a family right into the very front side of that. The business we were in was very people oriented.
Got it.
So, again, it made people feel like they were a part of something, and that was an advantage for us.
I get that. And also, I mean, it's also different. I think you guys were actually, like, you and your dad running Spring, right? And so if there's a difference if you are like actual family and...
Yeah, and it was not actually my dad.
It wasn't? What? Okay.
No, this is one of my favorite moments. So most people assume that Vern was my dad, but he was not. I had no family in Spring Mobile.
At some point I thought, okay, I have my stories way off then. I knew that Vern wasn't your dad, but I thought that for some reason that you and your dad were running Spring together at some point.
No.
Okay.
No, I've never worked with...
Never worked with your dad?
I've actually never worked with anyone in my family.
Really? Okay, my mistake. Thanks for correcting me on that.
So in a funny way, I've got a no friends and family policy inside of companies I try to run with, like a family-like culture.
Interesting. Okay.
And there's probably a therapist that could unpack that, but it's largely not wanting to be, responsible for their livelihood if something ever, changed.
Yeah.
But no, I never worked with my dad, and that was Vern, who was my partner, and he was incredible. And I'd say, certainly served like a father-like role.
Sure.
Especially as a mentor in business. But
that's interesting. Okay, thanks. Thanks for clarifying. So how did you end up getting connected with Vern then?
It's time. They say hard work meets opportunity.
Yeah.
So when I left college, I was working at a bank. I worked for the president of this little bank. It was called the Associates First Capital. It was actually a secondary finance company. And I had a great relationship with him. But I got an opportunity in 1999, all the way back then, to join a startup, a .com startup. And I was their 5th employee. Okay. The company was called IdeaExchange.com. And in that time, they'd gone out and raised somewhere around $40 million. And president of Bank One left to be their CFO, a good family friend of ours. He was going to be their chief operating officer. And I just, at that point, I felt like I was in my early 20s. What do I have to lose? These guys were leaving big jobs to go do this work. Long story short is it didn't work. And we got caught in that .com bubble piece. But, my version of the story is all the way until the end, I was hustling.
Yeah.
And even when it wasn't required and the writing was on the wall, I was still trying to figure out a way to sell assets, recapture capital for the investors, do something. And anyway, one of the folks who was on the executive team there and my former partner, Vern, they were close friends.
Okay.
And they introduced us, and that's how the story gets written.
Having a recommendation, you worked hard, hustled still to the end, and then having a recommendation, made the connection. There's something to that, I think. So I have two. Before we move on, you called it a secondary finance company? For those that aren't aware, what is a secondary finance company?
Associates First Capital back in the day was they stood behind like your traditional banks like J.P. Morgan and those folks, and we did we did different types of lending. So commercial loans. Oddly enough, we did retail programs. So you go into a retail store and they do 90 days. Oh yeah, no interest programs. Credit cards for gas stations. So if you went to like an Exxon or a Sinclair back in those days. We had all those different types of programs, and honestly, it was like a great job in college because I looked at a lot of small businesses' financial statements, and then we built, did a lot of financial modeling around, how to make money on these programs. So could you give somebody a year's worth of interest free on a certain size of purchase, and if so, how much would the retailer pay for that? So anyway, we did some really cool modeling on these kind of secondary programs.
That's cool. Did you end up using any of that when you were at Spring later? Like any of these, like applying any of that secondary financing knowledge to, I don't know, just unique programs?
I think that less than using the secondary finance knowledge is that, anytime you're learning something in school and applying it every day, I think that, my understanding of a financial statement, for instance, and how a 3-statement model should tie together and how you would really underwrite a small business and offer a credit line of, a certain amount of money and what the variables were. I was doing that when I was in college. And so while I was in the finance program, I feel like it just kind of accelerated my knowledge that I was learning at school just because I was applying it every day.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that making perfect sense. It something too, just doing the work and actually having a little bit of contextual knowledge to see how all those different pieces work together. I remember thinking about that in my undergrad, like not really quite understanding exactly what you said. Well, why is a 3-part statement important? Like, why do we need an income statement and a cash flow statement and everything else? Okay, so I jumped ahead. Thanks for following me. Thanks for following me down that little rabbit hole. I can't see something shiny and not chase it. So on the timeline, then back to that, you're here, you move in Salt Lake, and you end up getting somewhat situated, in your place, kind of finding your place, so to speak, and just getting into a routine. You end up in high school, and I think you mentioned that in somewhere along the way that you got involved in DECA, right? Was that your first tie into formal? I'm just curious what your experience was with that. If it was intentional, if you like, okay, this is something I want to do, I want to get into business and I'm interested in it, or did it just kind of happen? And was that what kind of influence did that have on you, if any?
Yeah, no, it definitely had an influence. I had a teacher that the gentleman that taught DECA back then was, he was really good at teaching us all how to write effective business plans.
Okay.
So that was the first, my first foray in like starting with, basically writing a statement around the business. Back then, a traditional business plan had like a marketing plan and a sales plan and financial projections, and a little different than what you'd see today in a pitch deck.
Yeah.
Because you weren't necessarily addressing the problem space back then. You were just trying to basically identify the fact that you could build a successful business. It was different than starting with the problem. But we would go through these business plan operations, and he was, largely with his help to get us in the right formatting structure. But yeah, I think my business plan was a DJ service.
Nice.
And we went and competed at state with that and presented. And, when you're in 10th grade, those are unique opportunities to get in front of people and answer questions and dress up. And, it was great.
Yeah. Did you end up executing on the plan? Did you end up starting your DJ service?
No, never opened a DJ business.
So 2026 is your DJ business?
Maybe. Yeah. I've got a daughter that just asked for a DJ set, so you never know.
Yeah, man. I like it. Do you remember the guy's name by chance? The teacher? I was trying to think of what it was, but
I don't remember his name, and that's kind of embarrassing because he was so helpful.
I'm gonna go look at my old transcripts and see. I think I can. So, do you remember what year this was?
Yeah, I mean, I was at West High School from 1990 to 1994.
Okay.
So
mine was a couple years later, but teacher turnover wasn't that much. I bet it was the same guy. I'll find him. I can totally remember the guy. I can see his face. But yeah. I didn't know it at the time, but I really I just wanted to work in the school store at lunch. I thought it was cool. And I remember if you worked in the school store at lunch, then you could, did you have to do that as part of your DECA program? Right. Yeah, and so then you had the after period. And so the reason I liked that is because then I could actually I would get out of school early on our early days, and then I could go work a job, and I would go to my actual job and then make some money. So that was a cool time. Yeah. Okay. So you finish up a DECA. You didn't start a DJ business, but then where did you end up going after high school? Was college? And you mentioned you went to college. So was that always in the plan for you?
I don't know. I mean, I think college was always in the plan. My parents really focused on education for all of us. My mom ended up becoming a school teacher towards the tail end of my middle school years, and she taught elementary school for, 25 or 30 years and retired a little bit ago. But she had a great career. But my grandmother was a teacher, and my parents were pretty focused on our education. My older brother Mark has always been at least academically superior, and he ended up at the Air Force Academy. And then
that's serious, right? I mean, that's not an easy thing to do, to get in those academies.
Yeah.
I mean, they tout it as like, right, free tuition, but also like it's really, really hard to get in.
Yeah. No, the academies are very difficult to get into. And Mark was a perfect candidate, and he went there and has done really well. And then my dad is a Vietnam vet.
Okay.
And so he, service was always part of kind of like our, at least family conversation. And so when I graduated from West, we didn't have money for college. So a path for me was I joined the Air National Guard and went to Air Force basic training and technical school. And then I came back and had GI Bill money. And then I went to University of Utah.
So how long were you in the Guard?
I was enlisted in the Guard for 6 years.
Okay.
1995 to 2001.
Nice. What did you end up doing during your time there?
Career code was 2E631, which stands for outside cable and telecommunications. So what that means is I climbed telephone poles, physically climbed telephone poles, and worked on antenna systems at the top of those. And then I would climb, steel antenna structures and work on the top of those antenna systems. And then the third thing is we would splice ground cable. So it was hard work.
Yeah. As you're telling this, I'm thinking like, that'd be terrifying. But I know when you're in the military, like you're just doing it. Like it doesn't matter if you're scared of heights. But were you, was that ever a thing? Were you ever like, were you ever nervous climbing up those things?
Oh yeah. I mean, most people don't realize when you climb a telephone pole, you basically have two spikes on your boots, one on each boot, and you free climb it. And then you put your safety strap in when you get to the top. So and all the safety strap does is keep you close to the pole.
Sure.
So, which isn't necessarily even the best outcome
because if you're going to fall and you're going to.
Yeah. So I've saw in basic training or in our technical school, we saw some wild stuff because they would take you to the top and they had these telephone poles and they were in kind of, I wouldn't say padded. It was just soft dirt around it, but you'd get up there and then you'd have to lean back onto your safety strap and throw like tennis balls to each other and catch them. And I saw some people take some gnarly tumbles, but
oh man,
thankfully I wasn't one of them.
I guess it does. They know what they're doing with that stuff and training and getting you the skills that you need. I guess. I mean, they're so good at shaping people into being exactly what they need them to be. It's cool.
Frankly, I wish more people would do it, and I think it's still not as well advertised as it should be. I mean, one of the best things it did for me was get me out of my zip code.
Yeah.
We didn't make it easy on my parents in middle school and high school. I was a little bit of a troublemaker, and like literally getting you out, seeing the world, feeling like you're doing something for the good of not just yourself, but for our country, giving a sense of purpose. Those things were all valuable, really valuable. And I frankly, I just wish more people had the opportunity or took the opportunity.
I 100% agree. By the way, I think there's, and there, being involved. I've talked to people who've done it in a handful of different ways, right? You can do it through, right here in Utah, it's common. Like there's church, you do it with your church. That's cool. With the military, also really cool. Like I talked to someone who did it with the Peace Corps, right? A couple of years, but doing something that's separating from yourself, I feel like you just learn, which I think is counterintuitive to me at least. By doing something that's not for you, you learn so much about yourself. At least I did.
Yeah.
I think I did. And so.
And I like those three options. I think, a religious mission is noble. Yeah. I think serving your country is noble. I think going off to the Peace Corps, noble.
Yeah.
Those are all great ways to get kids away from their neighborhood and away from their friends and force them to, start thinking more broadly about the world.
Totally. There are probably other ones that we didn't think of, but yeah, I think well said. Thank you. So was Did you think of the military when you joined? Was it always a path to like education at the U of U, or was it, I don't know. How did that kind of formulate?
I don't know that it was as calculated as that. You know, I think it was, for me, I knew I wanted to go to college. I knew that I wanted to go to something like the University of Utah.
Okay.
And, you know, I wanted to have a social life. I wanted the football, you know, aspect of it. I loved sports. I played sports in high school, and I wanted to go to a university that had those things, but I couldn't afford it. Mm-hmm. So, you know, it was a path in a way. So, you know, in some ways it was a selfish endeavor, I guess, not without sacrifice.
I mean, your words, I wouldn't call it selfish. I think anytime you're willing to, you know, give up 6 years, like you did in this case, invest 6 years in service, like you get something out of it, no question. But I mean, I don't know. But hey, your words, man. It wasn't necessarily calculated to take your time in the Guard and leverage that as the path to college. But you did go to college, and did you already know when you started college that you wanted to study business? You mentioned you studied finance, so
yeah,
okay,
yeah. I was one of the lucky ones that, you know, early on kind of knew that my passion was around business.
Okay,
so I was pretty steadfast. I wasn't somebody who changed my major a ton during. I don't even think I changed it at all, actually.
You just knew it was. Do you remember what it was about it that you liked, or was it just resonated with you?
You know, again, my uncles were all ranchers and, you know, entrepreneurs, and, you know, in their own regard. And I think it just came relatively natural to me. You know, I always kind of had an angle, at least, in trying to think through how things were working and how people made money. And so, you know, and I kind of enjoy the spirit of that.
As you were studying business, did you always know that that entrepreneurship was something that you wanted to participate in, or to start a business, or you weren't looking for that?
I don't think so. I think that if you had talked to me leaving college, I was more on a corporate finance path.
Yeah.
And I, you know, would have told you that, you know, hopefully I would be, you know, running a big division of a large company someday. But I'd go down that road through corporate finance. I think that's what I would have charted.
I was selfishly interested in that question because, you know, growing up in proximity geographically, as we did, I was also seeking, my whole life I've always sought for stability financially until just recently. And that, like above all else, like sacrificing, you know, definitely sacrificing, I don't even know what the right word is, but just prioritizing stability financially. Like that's all I freaking wanted, is like just to make sure that I could, you know, stay stable financially. And so I'm just interested to know how other people feel about it. If that's also something that, like, you know, it's just something that, if that's a unique experience for me, or if it's something that's shared among, you know, other people from our neighborhood. So anyway.
I would say that it's shared. You know, I've had some streaky moments of, you know, being willing to take a lot of risk, and, you know, we might cover some of those. But the idea for me, traditionally, like I'm not a complete risk taker. You know, I've worked around people who have made and lost everything in their life 3 times over. And I don't have that level of risk. Like today, I wouldn't risk what my family's lifestyle for another potential to make a lot more money. That's not in my kind of gene pool. And I do think that some of that is rooted from the fact that I watched my parents sacrifice so much to provide stability. And I don't want my kids to feel that insecurity ever.
Totally. That's like ditto. Did you realize what your parents were sacrificing in the moment? Or was it something that you only realized much later?
I think much later. I probably made it harder for them in the moment. If my parents were here, you know, all of my siblings were good students, and, you know, we were mostly a normal family, but my brother and I were 2 years apart. We fought, you know, a lot. And that was physical. And I think of the 1,000 times we've probably fought, he's won 999 of them. And then my little sister's adorable. But somewhere in the middle there, you know, I was rowdy outside of the house. And, you know, I don't think I was paying attention to what they needed. Between middle school and high school, I was pretty selfish with, if I was cool enough, and, all those things that are so trivial now.
Yeah. But then it's hard in the moment. Like, well, you're doing what you're supposed to be doing as a kid. Finding boundaries, pushing them, making a little, just kind of, I feel like that's, kind of those bumps and bruises along the way are really how you understand how things operate, and you learn a lot about yourself and what's important. And also maybe there's a little, I've never thought about this before, but, maybe there's a little cosmic intervention there to remind you about that, to give you a little humility as you get older.
Yeah.
I think about those things, those moments you have from when you're younger, and I think it gives me a little bit of extra humility. Not that you're lacking for humility, by the way, but anyway. Okay, so you mentioned taking risks, and it's interesting that you say, like, I'm not a big risk taker, and I believe that, but also from the outside, like, it doesn't seem from an outsider's perspective. So I guess my ask is, please redirect me here. But it doesn't seem that you've also been necessarily afraid of risk in some ways. So it doesn't seem like you've operated from like, I'm scared to take a risk, but also you mentioned how you're like, I don't also necessarily, I'm not looking for risk. I'm not looking to, leverage everything I have and bet the farm on something next. So I don't know, framework isn't the right approach, but do you just have any thoughts on how you generally like to approach risk or taking risk, or how you have risk, or how you have through your career?
Yeah. I mean, having co-founded now 4-ish companies, I think it's calculated risk. Okay. I think there's usually some sort of a hypothesis that goes with it. Most of the companies that I've been involved with, I've actually kind of bet on myself. So I've been a part of those. Okay. I've certainly invested in many companies that I have not been a part of. And that's a business model. That's called angel investing. And I'm not very good at it. And, I think that I'll come back to, risk for me has to be calculated. And, a little different. When I started, I was coming from a place that I didn't have anything to lose.
Okay.
And, there's all these kind of backdrop stories. And when I was a senior in college, my fraternity house burned down and I lost almost everything due to the smoke damage. And so, I was living, for the first little while out of college on a bed frame and a sleeping bag, trying to work to pay rent. And,
that's brutal.
These are the moments where you're like, well, what risk did I really take? 'Cause, I could have found a way to find a bed frame and a sleeping bag some other way. So
that's a good point.
I didn't feel like I was taking a lot of risk when I went to work at, ID Exchange and leave the bank and then, roll over to even starting Spring Mobile. I didn't have a lot of capital. In fact, I had none, but we found a way. And so I wasn't taking a lot of risk. It was mostly my time.
Interesting. How do you treat your time versus your money now? Like, I've been thinking recently about our time, and right, it's interesting because when you're young, especially, you're like, I love what you said, and you're like, I just was investing my time, paraphrasing here, and it's true. It's actually the only, maybe I'm like getting a little old man thinking about it, but like, yeah, time's all you got. And so I don't know, like, do you treat your time differently now, or is it still, yeah?
I do, for sure. And, I think everyone, again, is different. Sure. So I think my program is I'm not here to preach and tell everyone else that's the program that should work for them.
Sure.
The body of work that we did and then my life experience, some combination of those things leads to, how you want to allocate the things that in your life that are finite. And time is certainly one of those. It's undisputed. So, today, a lot more thoughtful about how I spend my time. And, I think if it comes down to a handful of buckets for me, so certainly there's a business bucket. I think it's much smaller than what it used to be, but my family has a bucket, key relationships have a bucket, my health has a bucket. And if it's not serving, one of those 4 things, then a lot of times I just need to have a boundary that says no, which is hard.
That's freaking hard. Yeah. Saying no is hard, I think. But I think it's kind of a muscle, right? I guess you kind of just explained it. If it's not in the 4 buckets, like, you either need to look at what's it going to come from, or it's got to be a no. Yeah. That's good. I like that. I like that a lot. You really boiled that down. Thanks. Okay. So So as you mentioned a minute ago about how you said co-founded ish, I think, a handful of startups, 4, I think you said. And I'm going to write this down so that I don't forget. Angel, I'm going to put an X on it. I'll say this or I'll forget it. Cause I'd love to come back and hear your thoughts on, you mentioned you're not very good at angel investing. I think that's an interesting side note, but you mentioned 4 companies that you've started, 4-ish. And so what was the first one that you started? We're not talking about your DJ business, I'm guessing here.
Right? No. The first real business we started was called Spring Mobile.
Okay.
And we founded that in April of 2001. And that was a mobile phone retail business, a very unsexy mall kiosk. When people would walk by, our employees would try to get their attention and sell them a mobile device. So April 2001, that business was started with 2 partners.
Okay.
Still 2 of my favorite people in the entire world. And I didn't know either of them until the week before we started the company.
That's bold, man.
It's bold. It's lucky.
Yeah. I mean, maybe. Yeah. Did you do diligence on them, or how did you?
Well, one was the person that found me that we kind of explained
Vern.
before, Vern.
Okay.
And Vern's 34 years older than I am. So I was in my, early 20s at that time when we started this thing, 24, 25. The deal there was, a cut of sweat equity for me. And that was a little bit up front, and then quite a bit more when the hard money loan we took against Vern's piece of land in Heber was paid off. And then we brought in another partner, Brett Bradshaw.
Okay.
And Brett ran sales for us. And Brett also was an equity partner. And Brett and I are comparably aged. I'm a little older than Brett, although I'd like to tell you I'm younger. I'm a little older than Brett. And 3 completely different people, didn't know each other, came together kind of over the 2 weeks leading up to this. We acquired a little company that had 5 or 6 of these stores through a hard money loan, and then kind of spun this thing up.
Have you ever read the book The Art of the Start by Guy Kawasaki?
No.
Okay. Never mind then. Great book. I really like it. And I just was interested because this is something that he talks about a lot in the book. Right? But it was a book that was required, I believe, required reading for one of my classes in 2007. But you were not starting. You were already deep running your business by then. So anyway, never mind. The reason I asked is that Guy talks in there about he has this whole portion dedicated, and I remember it standing out to me about how important it is to choose your founders, because you're going to spend a lot of time with them, and you're going to influence each other's lives in a lot of ways. So. But that wasn't the case. You just got lucky, or how did you meet Brett? How did you get connected with Brett?
Brett was working for the company that we acquired.
Okay.
And he was, their strongest sales leader.
Okay.
And so he knew the business that we were getting into better than Vern or I did. So we just went after their top performer, essentially, and brought him on to the team. And there's a whole story around how Vern actually got him to jump on board, and
how was it? I mean, this is your first acquisition, which you hadn't even, right? I mean, so
yeah, the company we were acquiring, it was kind of easy due diligence for me. So we did Vern originally hired me because he was going to buy the company, buy the equity.
Okay.
And they hadn't paid taxes. They hadn't, for several years, they had real loose accounting. So, it was easy duty. So we ended up with an asset purchase. And anyway, Brett was working there, and they didn't pay Brett. So Brett was not taking calls from anybody. And Vern if you know Vern, he'll go to all ends and try things that most people wouldn't try. And that included calling Brett on a Saturday morning at 6 a.m. And Brett just accidentally answered his phone, and Vern was able to convince him to come have breakfast, and then able to get him to join the team.
That's cool. I like the creativity there. So I would have, if before this, I'd started my prep for this episode and prep for our conversation, I wouldn't have necessarily thought about I know I still don't, but Vern had some pretty solid business acumen. He was smart, and he did some really good things. I mean, the way he structured the hard money loan that you were just describing, I mean, that's that's a good way, I think, to decrease risk for him and also for the company, everything around it. I mean, am I reading that right? Is he?
Oh yeah, Vern's has incredible acumen, really smart guy. I mean, he grew up being an entrepreneur in a different time.
Yeah.
So he was in the gas business, the video business. He caught some good trends, but he's one, and he'll tell you he's made and lost it all a handful of times, and incredible risk taker. But also, the gentleman that would tell you the harder that he works, the luckier that he gets.
Sure.
He's responsible for a lot of the culture and character building. I learned a lot from Vern and just his kind of demeanor in tough situations, and he's and then trusting people like me. He was the best.
What is it to his demeanor in tough situations? It seems like there's something there. Like what?
Well, I could give a million stories. I mean, we were renegotiating, a contract that was essential for us with AT&T, and this is 9 years after we started the company. And at this point, the company was probably 70-ish million in top line revenue.
Okay.
From 150,000 when we started it. So. Yeah. We'd had some reasonable growth over those years, and we'd survived kind of the 2008 crisis. The markets dropped and the world felt heavy.
Yeah, the housing shortage, right?
Housing shortage,
or not shortage. Sorry, yes. Anyway.
So anyway, we went into this big meeting, and I spent a lot of time preparing. I'd read every contract that we had. I'd sought out peers with other similar businesses that had contracts with large carriers. And so I was prepared, but I was nervous. I was, 32 at the time. And anyway, we got in the elevator, and Vern's we're in the building. He says, "You look nervous." And I said, "Well, I am nervous." And he said, he just looked at me, and on the way up the elevator, he put some water on his hair and then just like pushed it up like this. And then the elevator went ding, and they opened it up, and they were standing there to meet us, and it had like water dripping on his face, and his hair looked crazy. And I was like, this guy is something else. Just did not care, could easily lighten the mood.
And he's just doing that to just completely change to take you out of that moment. He knew what you needed. He's like, look, we just need to, like, to your point, lighten the mood. And it worked.
Yeah,
I'm guessing you guys didn't go out of business, so you renegotiated the contract. And then was there like I can paint this? You're in there, you're going up the elevator, spikes his hair all up, and then the door opens, and people around the other side are standing there, fairly buttoned up, I'm guessing. And what's their response?
Yeah, I mean they got to business relatively early. Most people appreciate somebody that has a personality.
Yeah,
and he brought lightness to the room even for them, which. Is something that I learned from him, which is like, you don't have to get just straight to business every single time. And his personality was pretty pervasive, and people remember him for that. So yeah, he was willing to lighten the mood in moments like that, and not just when it was fun, but when it was critical. Yeah. He was still willing to do it, which is an interesting attribute.
So here's what I'm thinking of in my mind: the 2 points that are connecting, which is this. His willingness to do whatever it took to in that moment to lighten the mood, to give you to kind of just help you get a reset, and ultimately, which he knew was crucial for the negotiation that you guys were going to go into. But you also mentioned that he was, in general, but in general, a big risk taker, right? Like he said, he made and lost it all a bunch of times. I mean, do you think are people? I can't think of someone like that I know personally, not off the cuff at least. Is it just like some people are just kind of born like that? Do you think he's just like one of those people who just like, he doesn't freaking care?
Yeah, I think there are people who have risk thresholds that allow them to suffer the lows and experience the highs, and be resilient through all of those things. And he's one of them.
I really respect that. So within that, do you think there's like like tolerance that can be built or established as well? Like I'm thinking of the different thresholds that people have. Do you think you can like increase your risk tolerance threshold, or do you? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably funny for me to think about in hindsight. If Vern was here and we asked him that question, I don't know that he would ever tell you that he thought much about the lows.
Really?
And there's something about that personality type that feels like they're never going to lose. And so how do you get from a high to a low? Mm-hmm. You've got to lose a lot. And, but they never stop believing in themselves. And that allows them to like find the next thing and just go all in and experience that high again. And then it almost reaffirms the fact that they're never going to lose. And, it's a bit of a roller coaster. I'm sure there's a book on these sort of entrepreneurs that make and lose everything several times over. He's one of them.
He must have people in that area must have a strong belief in themselves to be able to keep going, because I guess, I don't know. I think it's just an interesting perspective. So thanks for that. All right. So, related to believing in yourself, you mentioned earlier in our conversation how something that you were doing is effectively, you're like, the companies that have been successful and I've bet on myself. Was that like the first time you did that? Was that a little bit of a mind shift for you to get into, to bet on yourself, or did it kind of just happen like you're describing with the spring situation?
I mean, spring happened kind of spontaneously, and it was opportunistic for me because I was on my way out of that .com business. I received my first opportunity to own equity. So I felt that kind of ownership mentality of like, I'm really going to participate if I can make this work. So, I'd say, I certainly was betting on myself, but it was mostly opportunity cost at the time of not going out and getting another, banking job that paid more money and all of those, sort of things. So
makes sense. Well, let me think more. I think there's more to that story, and I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the question to ask. So I'm just going to ask. I think there's more to that story. I'd love it if you'd keep going with it.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, in the seat that I was in, running a company like Spring Mobile, most people, when you are named the president of a company like that, most people get into the kind of like the title and the affirmation and the hierarchy. That's never been my jam.
Okay.
Not for any particular reason. It just hasn't been. So, I can openly tell people that in most of the times in the companies that I've run, where I've been either the president or CEO and had a meaningful equity stake, most of those companies I have not been the highest paid employee. And most of that deference goes to making sure that your top contributors are paid as much as you can to retain them. It's making sure that the cash flow that I don't need can go back into the company to build the company and the equity that we need. But frankly, there's just some people who have those roles and those titles who cannot stand the idea of not being the top earner. And, I think that at times that can potentially hold a company back given the size and stage of it. I should also say that we never took outside money. And so for a well-funded company, that may not be true. I haven't fully participated in a company that's been well-funded from the beginning. Almost everything that we've done has been kind of bootstrapped. And there's some benefits to that too.
Sure.
We were able to kind of do what we wanted to do, and good times and bad. Yeah.
And so can we talk a little bit more about your approach when you're in a place where, it would have been easy, maybe not easy, but it was an opportunity to probably take some outside money at some point, but you felt really strongly that you didn't. And I was reading in my prep here that you put a lot of effort into avoiding the path forward of taking outside money. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you did and how you were able to avoid it? And obviously there's the benefit of, to your point, being able to do what you wanted and retain, more control. But I just want to hear in general a little bit more about why, just what your thought process was. And then also, so from macro perspective, thought process, and micro perspective, kind of what the tactics were around being able to do that. 'Cause that's not easy.
No, it's not easy. And, and especially in a high growth business. Mm-hmm. So, like just framing perspective for people that are listening, the business started in 2001 with, a few $100,000 a year in revenue. By 2000 and let's call it 14, we're probably 120 plus million in revenue.
Wow.
And then, and all of that run was no outside capital.
Okay.
Then we sold the business in 2014 to GameStop.
Okay.
And then we had public capital And then when I left in 2019, it was just over $1 billion in revenue that year. So 18 years from literally startup to $1 billion, a good chunk of that run, at least, time wise on the time horizon was no outside money. How do you do that?
Yeah, especially, sorry, go ahead.
Diligent cash flow management. We used every financing tool imaginable, which is, by the way, these things aren't available to every business. So, we used factoring, accounts receivable financing, lockbox financing. We did very non-traditional financing programs, but to do that, it's very high interest rate. And so you have to have a business that's growing fast enough that it makes sense for you to pay those sort of rates to grow a company like that. For us, it made sense because we felt like we could use that capital to grow the business, and then the exit multiple would be significantly higher. So paying short-term interest, the business cash flow just fine. So paying the interest was not as much of a problem as like making sure that we had the capital to grow. And then eventually you grow out of those. So you'll get to a point where you can graduate out of those, get to a traditional lending facility, and then, now you're just working with your local Zions Bank on, a business line of credit. And then, before you know, you don't need any of those things.
The number that stood out to me just now as you were talking about it, thank you for the breakdown, but you said the revenue when you took it over the company was $150K, something like that?
It was nominal.
Okay. Do you remember, like, percentage-wise I'm just thinking 150K business, you're selling cell phones. That's expensive inventory to keep.
Yeah.
Right? That feels like a really hard window to operate in. A successful business with, you said, a few locations with only not that much revenue.
Yeah. I mean, again, like
that's why they don't pay taxes.
A lot of times luck would have it. So Brett was an incredible sales leader and one of the best retail operators I've ever worked with. He was really, really great with the teams. But remember our conversation about 3-statement financial models. And when we started this thing, I read QuickBooks for Dummies. I set up our chart of accounts. I managed all of the financials. We did rigorous cash flow management, reconciliation work against inventory. You couldn't get loose because the income statements were rich and the cash flow was volatile.
Yeah.
And if you weren't keen on how those two things work together, you could get lost in the business.
Man. So this is stepping back a little bit too, but you mentioned that when you acquired the company that it was an asset purchase and not a stock purchase. And so do you remember what the assets were that you purchased from? Was it mostly like the name and the inventory, or was it?
Not the name. We came up with our own name. So I think we just purchased, possibly put some value on leases, possibly put some value on cell phone, the contracts that person had with the mobile carriers.
Makes sense.
And then probably some like property.
Interesting. Okay. So you buy the assets, you're here, and you've given a good framework here. Something I'm curious about is your strategy. And here's what I'm thinking, because you described how, everyone, the stores before effectively, I think you said they were mostly kiosks in a mall or somewhere where people just kind of walk over. And your customer in that case is a spillover benefit, right? You go to Walmart.
Yeah.
And I say Walmart because I used to work at a cell phone store in Walmart a long time ago. And your customer shows up at Walmart to buy whatever they're going to buy, and then you just, I need a phone. I end up talking to them. But you decided to take a different approach, which I think is really interesting. Obviously, it worked.
Yeah.
But to convince a consumer to make a specific trip to go buy a cell phone, that seems like the non-obvious path forward. Obviously, it was the right path.
Yeah.
But for an idiot like me, it seems like the non-obvious path forward. So I'm curious if you wouldn't mind kind of unpacking or talking through why you decided to take that approach. And then secondarily, how you made it effective, how you were able to convince consumers to make a specific trip to come and buy cell phones from you guys at a specific store.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's probably a lot of pillars here that I'll use.
Sure.
The first is authenticity. So, it didn't take but a couple of months for us to leave one of our properties, Vern and Brett and I together. And on the way out, I looked at them and I said, guys, would you buy anything from one of our stores? And they were like, no. And I thought, we kind of mutually agreed it was not representative of who we were. So that was number one. I think the second thing we thought a lot about is that we were in the people business, and what type of environment would best suit employees and make them love where they would come to work every day.
That's a good point, yeah.
And we felt like a kind of an in-store model versus the kiosks in the middle of the mall, where we could curate music and they could have a locker, and, we could have team meetings, and just, at the time, again, we didn't know what we were doing in retail, but we were really thinking about the employee and the environment for the employee. And then, we're betting on the fact that the market would grow significantly. Back in 2001, I think less than half of the US population had a mobile device. So then we started to think about, what happens if people are in here with kids or buying 2 or 3 devices at a time. So then what's the customer environment look like? And then, we were smart enough to product market test it. So we didn't just go wholesale change at once. We took one of our properties that had a kiosk and built an inline store in that same shopping center, and it went really well. And so, we just built a platform, and honestly, we leveraged a lot of Vern's experience with both gas and video stores. He spent quite a bit of time in retail real estate.
Yeah.
So, that was a massive advantage. And so we leaned on that, and he became pretty good at helping us choose the right locations for these sort of small box 1,500, 2,000 square foot retail stores.
That is a nice advantage to have that experience from Vernon. So was there much of a learning curve there? I mean, was it effectively like we take what we had set up in the kiosk and then we plug it into, a place with 4 walls, or were there a lot of other changes you had to make too from retail? No,
there's staffing changes, and kind of merchandising becomes completely different. You don't want people to walk into something that looks bare. So, it was our first chance of doing like real retailing, like merchandising, store environment, traffic counters. There's a lot to retail that most people don't understand, associate training. Yeah. So we learned a lot.
Your traffic counter is something that I hadn't thought of before. Was there like an advantage in a data perspective there? Because now you, I just realized that now you're able to learn, I'm guessing, a lot more about your consumer. Was this a consumer, as opposed to, I'm thinking, again, please redirect me here. I'm making a big hypothesis, but I'm thinking comparing this to a kiosk or a Walmart situation. Previously, you're thinking someone shows up at your store. It could be one of a million scenarios. One is which they came here to buy a phone, or one is which they're actually a mall consumer, but they're here. But if someone shows up at your store, then okay, this is a phone consumer. This is who we're looking for. This is our audience. I mean, that's a very rich source of data.
Yeah. I mean, what it is a data source. It is what I would consider a baseline of data. And, you can use it to make sure what we were looking primarily for is to make sure we could meet our customer needs. So we would come up with ratios of what's the right staff to customer ratio. And you could see quickly with these data sets who was in the red and where you were understaffed. And those are largely missed sales opportunities. So, the traffic counters became kind of essential to our business model.
Is there an automated solution for those? Will you use a technology solution for it?
Yeah, there's a handful of them in the market. And
have you seen big changes in that from where you were doing traffic counting in the early 2000s and then now, right? I'm guessing, like, if I walk into a store, I assume that some stores there's probably some sort of, it's going to scan me. Look, this is a guy, he's in his 40s, and this is what you might be looking for, whatever. Like, you can do a lot of stuff now, right? I mean,
you can. I mean, I think there's also like a barrier to privacy and trying to figure out how much data that you really want and what you can actually do with it.
Fair.
And so again, I still go back to, like, what is the purpose of getting the information that you have, and what are you going to do with it? And for most of the environments that we were in, the main purpose was just to, like, figure out quantity of people coming in. Sure, is there a lot you could do if I knew who you were and, could architect it back to your account, and of course, but we're not totally there yet.
Interesting. Do you think there's, you mentioned about gathering it only around solving I'm paraphrasing here, but it seemed like you're gathering data or information around solving a problem. And the next thought that I had was, if you have information like that and you don't have an intent for it, then having extra information could also become a risk or a liability at some point. Sure. So yeah, okay. I was wondering if that was the connection there because, okay, cool. So what was when you knew that was the path forward? You said you product tested it with building out a store or two but you didn't wait too long on that, right? Did you?
No, I mean, look, the business model for Spring Mobile at the time was we were very focused at like winning our local market. Okay. So we really wanted to like be the preferred partner in the Rocky Mountain region. And so we kind of quantified the number of stores and everyone else had and what we had. And we felt like, we could get, when you're in a highly concentrated relationship like we were, so our exclusive partner was Singular, and then when Singular was purchased by AT&T. So AT&T was our exclusive partner. One way that we felt like we could gain advantage, or at least it become important, was to have scale.
Okay.
And if you try to run scale nationally right out of the gate, that becomes difficult in a multi-unit retail environment for a lot of reasons. But what we try to do is just get scale in the markets that we were in. And we were able to do that pretty effectively. And I mean, that came to mapping out street corners, figuring out who was where, and trying to go get the best real estate. And that strategy worked. We were able to accomplish that objective. And then we just kept kind of building on, scaling it after we would say that we nailed it.
Nail it and scale it?
Yeah.
I heard you say that another time. Was that one of your kind of, I don't know, but just working something that you use or you kind of leaned on?
Yeah, it's a term that we used internally quite a bit. I mean, it wasn't just about scaling or nailing the business model, but remember software systems, inventory management, SKU management, people management. That stuff all gets harder if you don't have the right systems in place as you start to get volume. And so we really took the time to get the architecture in place before we scaled,
It clearly worked. Yeah. So geographic approach. And then, how far along were you when GameStop came calling?
Well, GameStop, they originally called on Simply Mac.
Oh, okay. So maybe I'm getting ahead of ourselves here. So tell me how you transition. Why don't you help me make this transition from?
Yeah, we started Spring Mobile in 2001. I think we've kind of shared that story.
Yeah.
2005, we'd committed to AT&T exclusively. So we were thinking about how do we potentially diversify ourselves. And we really felt like we were good at that point at tech retail.
Yeah.
That we had the systems in place to do good work in that type of an environment.
Yeah.
So we went through and identified, who is in the electronic, like the tech space that we felt like had really great products and terrible distribution. And Apple was at the top of the list. So this is, 2005.
Okay. Yeah.
So pre-iPhone, pre-iPad. And we went out and made a pitch to Apple. Steve Bain was a gentleman that came on board and was the president of Simply Mac. And he was able to get us in front of Apple in Atlanta. And we made this great pitch, like, look what we're doing in the mobile space. We'd love to do this for you in the Apple space. They loved it. They obviously knew what was on their product roadmap. So they knew they wanted distribution in more markets and more places. We had no idea. We just thought we had given a great pitch.
But you had, I'm sure. But also.
So we started a company called Simply Mac and headed out to build a handful of those stores. Apple participated. It was a great business. Once the iPhone and the iPad launched, you can imagine there was a lot of demand. The Apple brand really took off with consumer.
Yeah.
Those stores had really high sales per square foot. And ultimately what ended up happening in that kind of 2012-ish timeframe is we were considering, just like we only have a certain amount of capital to free cash flow to deploy. The economics of the mobile business were superior in almost every way. It was a lower revenue business, but significantly more profitable. The Apple business, the Apple hardware business, is not a high margin business. Lots of revenue there, but not a lot of margin. And also the stores were, much bigger, more complicated to run. So we decided was both were great businesses, but we were going to exit the Mac business, take the proceeds from exiting the Mac business and pile them into the mobile business and just continue accelerating that growth. So we took Simply Mac out. We hired an investment bank, took them out to market. And oddly enough, it was GameStop who called.
Okay.
And, I assumed it'd be a junior business development person from GameStop. It actually was the CEO and the chairman of the board that flew out to see us. So they'd been to every store. They really liked the concept. GameStop was looking for diversification. GameStop has like 5 lives since this has happened. But at that time, they were very interested in that as a platform.
Sure.
So we sold it to them. I think it closed on Halloween of 2012. And then I sat on the board with them for a year, which was a requirement. They could only buy a certain percentage, and then they could buy the rest the following year, approved by Apple. But during that year, board tenure, the CEO of GameStop approached us and said, "Hey, we'd like to buy your mobile business too." And, that was, at that time, interesting.
Yeah. Well, tell me about, I want to hear about, if you can, about, is this when you were acquired by GameStop, when Simply Mac was acquired by GameStop, was this your second acquisition, the first being when you bought Spring, or when you bought the company that became Spring, or had you done any acquisitions between the two?
Yeah, we'd done a handful of acquisitions along the way. Okay. So both businesses, Simply Mac and Spring Mobile.
Oh yeah, of course, because you had acquired, yes.
Yeah. So even inside of each of those businesses, we had acquired, small things that we could afford to do internally. Again, even with Simply Mac, we didn't take any outside money.
So still bootstrapped, still private money, or still, but still able to acquire what you need. You did use debt at some point. Yes.
We used debt as a mechanism, but only if it was traditional or secondary debt. Nothing that was convertible for equity. Our cap table stayed really clean.
But okay. So what I'm thinking of is, how different was the acquisition between these deals that you'd done in the past and then being on? Was it first of all a huge difference being on the sell side, from going from the buy side, and then also just the size and scale of the deal? Was it totally different?
Oh yeah, I mean, again, first of all, selling to a strategic like GameStop is. There's a lot of advantages to doing something like that. One is they don't get into the same mechanics that you find in a lot of other transactions. So there was no debt that they put on the company. They paid 100% cash. They did not want to, the traditional like earn out structure. Because they're publicly traded, they don't like complicated, they did not. I don't think that's true for all public companies, but GameStop at that point in time just wanted to just be the complete shareholder of these businesses. So on the opposite side, we didn't get to participate in the upside that we helped build after that, which is, maybe something that I would kind of take away. But the flip side is that they paid, 100% cash the day of closing, and there was no other mechanics other than that.
Just anecdotally, was it at some point a big check got deposited? Was that was that? I can imagine that feeling going a lot of different ways, but I actually don't want to give my hypothesis on it. What was that like when the day of close? You remember you mentioned the day. You're like, deal closed on, was it Halloween?
Yeah,
Halloween of this year. I mean, so you clearly remember it. What was it like?
Yeah, I mean, it was obviously life-changing event.
Yeah.
For us, there's life events that lead up to these sort of decisions. So, the year before in 2012, our company had just crossed $100 million in revenue. My wife, Mary, and I were building our house in Park City, and, we had our first daughter. Like, life was good.
Yeah.
We were physically active. Like, we'd finally kind of climbed the mountain, and I had a really serious health issue. I took my daughter to the Lorax movie, and I had a grand mal seizure. Broke my nose in the movie theater, and woke up on a gurney. Thankfully my wife was there. She's a registered nurse by trade, and that led to most of 2012 being kind of a journey for me around my brain And in September of 2012, I had a craniotomy to remove a blood vessel malformation. And, call it what you will, but when you go through those sort of like deep medical issues that are scary, really scary, the only thing that you think about is stability for your family.
Yeah.
And so at that moment in time, I was like, hey, if we can sell this thing, then to make sure my family was taken care of. That's pretty much all that was on my mind. And fortunately, again, the timing kind of worked out serendipitously that GameStop came. We had condition precedent with the transaction because we had already sold a business to them. So we had established an EBITDA multiple. We had established credibility with them. So, and we liked them. It was, we really enjoyed the folks who we were working with at GameStop. So those sort of things made it, more interesting. All the credit to Vern still, come back to him. He looked at Brett and I, he knew this was life-changing for us. And he just, he said, look, if you guys don't want to sell this, I won't sell it. So punchline is if you want to keep it, I'm in with you guys. So that was a great vote of confidence that he was not, chasing the sale. And then will forever be one of my favorite stories that the morning that we were negotiating the sales price, the final sales price, we already had 90% of the mechanics done except for price, which often happens in these deals. GameStop flew here and picked us up in their plane the night before. We flew to Las Vegas. They were having a big managers conference. Saturday morning, we went in to negotiate the final price, and it was the chairman of the board of GameStop, the CEO, their chief legal officer, their chief financial officer, and their head of strategy. So that, 5 or 6 people, me and Vern and I. And right when we get through most of the details, and they said, let's talk about this purchase price. We've got a gap. Vern did not tell me. He said, excuse me, gentlemen, I need to use the restroom. He gets up and leaves. And after about 10 minutes, everyone in the room realized he was never coming back. And so I'm in there, which was probably one of the greatest ace cards of all time, because I knew that he did not want me to negotiate the price down.
Of course. And
he had all the burden and the confidence in me to do that. And I knew he wasn't coming back. So,
that's pretty cool.
Think of the signal.
That's pretty cool.
It was incredible.
I mean, you've worked with this guy for a long time. You have a ton of respect for him, obviously. And to be at this moment, which is, there's a lot on the table for you and your families and everything, and both your companies, to just have him like give you like the little wink and a nod and be like, you freaking got this, man. Like, I believe in you and I trust you. And like that, I bet that felt really freaking good.
It felt great.
Also pretty freaking scary.
It was scary for sure. And then when we finally left that room, he was, he's like 50 yards away with a yard of margarita, just hanging out, like being as funny as he's always been. So
that's awesome.
But no, we got it over the finish line, and the deal carried. So I stayed and worked for GameStop for a period of time. I eventually ran all of their non-gaming businesses in the U.S. I ran a big division for them, and
you'd already been running a big company. So at this time, how many employees was Simply Mac? You talked about the revenue a little bit, but
this was now the combination of both Simply Mac and Spring Mobile selling to GameStop. So they had them both at this moment.
Okay.
And I think when we were done, there was probably 7,000 employees inside of that group.
So you'd already been running that's a really big company. So
yeah,
it wasn't a big change for you to be in charge of a bunch of people and a large P&L and everything. But I mean, was it? Well,
lots of cultural differences. I learned a lot, working in a publicly traded environment on the executive team. I was reading out on earnings calls with analysts asking me super hard questions. And then GameStop put a lot of capital into the business. So from the time we sold it till the time I left, I think we bought 35 companies.
Wow.
Deployed several $100 million, probably $500 million of capital. Wow. And rolled up, a lot of kind of independent operators and, built it into a good platform for them that they eventually sold in 2019.
And those 35 deals over how many years?
It was really honestly, it was over about a 3 to 4 year period.
That's pretty fast. That's a pretty fast deal velocity.
Yeah. So to answer your other question about, how did it feel?
Yeah.
It felt life-changing, but I would say that I didn't really want to accept it.
Yeah.
So the easiest move for me to do it, what I had been doing before, which is just like pretend like it didn't happen and go to work. And, you can imagine my primary job, even though I was the president of this division, my primary job was M&A. So I was on the road a lot for 3 or 4 years after that. And
the subcontext in my mind, what I was wondering about was, it's like kind of selling a company I've never been through, obviously from your perspective, but my hypothesis was that there's a little bit of a, like almost like a grieving moment, right? Like this is the end of a big chapter. You've built this thing for a really long time. And so this chapter of your life is moving on, and it's moving to the next thing. And so I was wondering around that, but your answer covers that, and that my approach was just to head down, go to work, keep going, keep grinding away. But you mentioned kind of just it's not funny, but it's kind of a casual story that you dropped in here about having a seizure. You say breaking your nose as you fell, and then having a craniotomy. And I think, look, I'm a medical. I don't know anything about anything with that. That's like brain surgery, right? They got to drill through your head. Yep. And I'm making a jump here, but are you saying then that your approach was still, obviously there were some changes there, but you were still kind of you mentioned at the end something about kind of pretending like it didn't happen. Is that kind of what your approach was? Like, I just need to keep focused and keep grinding forward, or
like the desire to please and make sure that everybody kind of got what they bargained for. Mm-hmm. I was an important part of the transaction with GameStop. So, I did work really hard there to make sure that it became lucrative, and it did become very lucrative for GameStop. But the catalyst to exiting the company was largely liquidity. And I would say that a fundamental premise or underlying criteria for that was just like my health.
Yeah, makes sense.
Like if we had so much of our family's net worth still tied up in the company. And frankly, Vern by that point was, in his 70s. And so, even for him, like there was a lot of money tied up into this thing. So it made the most sense for us. It, in hindsight now would have been significantly more lucrative if we would have just held it and kept growing it and building it. But that's Monday morning quarterback stuff. And, again, you make the decisions that you can with whatever purview you have at the time. And I still stand by the fact that was the best decision for everybody at the time.
I mean, to keep the quarterback analogy, it's hard to argue with the scoreboard, and things are working out okay. And so, yeah. So we were talking about GameStop and your work there, but you ultimately didn't end up staying at GameStop, right? You're now separated from them, most formally, I think.
Yeah.
So how did that all go down?
I mean, an odd and very unfortunate way. The CEO of GameStop that acquired our companies, his name was Julian Paul Raines, one of the 5 most influential people in my life. Costa Rican immigrant, incredible leader. He called me one day from the hospital. He had just had a massive seizure.
Wow.
And, I ended up talking to him. I talked to his nurse, and, you fast forward that to him being diagnosed with brain cancer, and then eventually, passed away. That changed the dynamic at GameStop tremendously. They went through a handful of different CEOs, a decent recruiting effort to get my wife and I to move to Dallas. And frankly, after 17, 18 years of kind of running a company from startup to that point, there was just, I had fatigue. I was ready to try something different. And so GameStop tried to go private back in those days. So I was the only person representing this technology brands division that had some turnover at the executive ranks. So I hung in there until they were able to sell. They were not able to sell GameStop, but they sold the divisions that I was running. And then I helped the new buyer transition those. And then I left on the day of that transition. When you're in an environment like that, I guess I go back, the takeaway for me was, how compelling it was to work for somebody who was a thoughtful leader. However, in his absence, Just a single person at the top. In his absence, how much chaos ensued. And I guess I really always assumed that people working at those levels of a publicly traded company were probably independently wealthy and would make good decisions for the virtue of shareholders. And that is not the case. And I would say that it probably silenced myself more than I should have, because I had imposter syndrome. I just felt like, I was a kid from a trailer park. I was lucky enough to build a company and sell it to them. And, they probably had better ideas. And I'm not saying my ideas were better than theirs, but I certainly was more silent, and I gave a lot of credence to the role they had. And I saw a lot of kind of weird behavior, and I just, ultimately just didn't want to be a part of it, didn't need to be a part of it. And it was my time to transition out. So I left on May 3rd of 2019. So it's been a minute.
Yeah. That seems like that was also a pretty impactful day. I mean, you ever do that just like you just clicked that date, like it was like it's right there, like you remember it. Was it one of those kind of impactful dates to you when you really moved on, or was it just, are you like have like a thing? Some people just have like a thing with dates or names or faces or.
No, a very impactful date for me to all of it. That was a company that I'd run for 18 years. I'd had so many employees inside of that company that I grew up with, and of course you do anything with all of your might for 18 plus years. And you're going to be sad the day that you depart. That being said, again, it doesn't take long for the company to move on.
Yeah.
And, you'd be surprised how fast people just kind of shuffle their feet to the next thing that's important to them. And they should. And I did the same thing. So I moved on to the next thing that I wanted to do.
So which was where did you move from there, from May 13th, May 3rd, May 13th?
May 3rd.
May 3rd,
yeah.
2018.
My wife and I always had talked about, her name's Mary, and we have 2 daughters. And both of our daughters through the public school system here, they do the French immersion program.
Nice. So
we decided to pick up our stuff in December of 2019. So very ill-timed. But we got a year-long visa in France, and we rented a little apartment in a little town called Antibes, and we put our kids in the international school, and decided to really take our family of 4, let everybody take 1 backpack, 1 toy, small apartment, and go kind of like just spend time together and see the world. Still one of our favorite places to go and one of our favorite memories. The kids always want to go back there, but of course we only made it, I think we made it 3 and some change months, and then got COVIDed back to Utah.
Yeah, it's unfortunate timing, but also, I mean, it sounds like like to your point, it's a cool memory. 3 and several months in, that's a big life change, man. Were you forced back? Like, was it one of those things that they were like you, for whatever reason, COVID like changed your visa, or was it just like, we're here, everything's getting locked down, we just gotta move on?
No, we were fine being there during the lockdown. What made us change, and we ended up literally leaving overnight, like ghosts in the night, was they stopped intercontinental flights. Oh. So as soon as we could not fly from Europe back to the United States, that started to feel a little confining. We have, we had parents.
Yeah.
And we just felt like, if something ever happened to anyone, we couldn't get to where we needed to be. So at that point, train stations were closed, rental cars were closed. We caught the last Delta flight from Paris back to JFK.
Wow.
And, again, it was kind of a wild time. But when you move there, everyone's like, wow, that sounds like a dream. Moving your family to another country is hard.
Oh, man.
Bank accounts, leases, enrolling kids in schools, visas. So, we'd fully kind of moved, embedded ourselves in, and we're just settling in when we had to pull up and get home. But gratefully we had a home to come back to. So
yeah, seriously. I cannot imagine. I think you're understating people like moving hard. Yeah, I can only imagine. There's so many different things you got to go through to get there, and that's a hell of a process, man. So anyway, so you end up coming back, and then, I mean, that was a big change. Like, so what do? You're like, well, we had the next year, or the next, so you're 3.5, 6 to 8 months or whatever we were, or 8 to 9 months we were thinking of. That's new. So now you have this window. What did you decide to do with your time at that point?
I did some angel investing. We touched on that. I'm not great at it. Some of this is, I probably as I age, perspective changes, but
Sure.
Whether it's, it's understanding that angel investing is a business model.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is that they have there's very few angel investors that don't invest across a wide portfolio with very strict rules on what they'll put in up front, what the hurdles need to be for the second amount, if they ever even will put in a second amount. And for me, I just get too personally vested. So, I invest in an entrepreneur, and then there are times when, it's just was either a bad investment. There's times it's a good investment, but I feel like it could be a lot better if people would work harder. Just there's a variety of things. It's just not my flavor.
Sure.
So
that'd be hard, man, because you invest. I'm guessing with people there, you get to know these people pretty well. There's relationships involved. That gets tricky, and then
there's that, and then there's also there's there's like a work ethic thing, and I only know it one way, which is the way that I did it. So
yeah, which is heads down,
all in.
Yeah,
and so I don't see that all the time. And I'm sure there's other ways to do it. But I haven't seen it yet. So, I guess that sometimes I have that expectation. The other thing is that I just also learned, back to my kind of buckets of where I want to spend my time.
Yeah.
That I love helping, people, but when you invest in some of these companies, sometimes that becomes a hall pass to them leaning on you to help them make decisions that they should be making.
Interesting.
And so where and how do you cap your time?
Mm-hmm.
And that becomes very difficult. So those relationships kind of get intertwined between an advisor and an investor, and not an official board member, but the CEO asking for important stuff. And I don't know. I didn't. Maybe it was the time when I got back from Europe, but I just not the business model for me.
It's interesting that the perspective of people leaning on you as a crutch in some ways. Like, well, we have an investor, we can lean on them. And I mean, I know there's an aspect to that, right? You obviously want your investments to be successful, but here's what the jump that I'm making. I had someone give me one piece of good advice once. Well, I've had lots of good advice, but one piece of advice that stands out to me. I asked this guy about parenting when I had my first kiddo, right? And he was like, look, Jeff, the only piece of advice I ever got that was worthwhile was to parent for independence. And that stuck with me. And, obviously it's not exactly the same, but you're an advisor, you're a mentor, and as an investor, you want them to ultimately be successful, which is not relying on you. And so that's a hard place to be, similar to a parent, right? Where you're like, you want to help them, you have limited bandwidth, but ultimately they need to learn how to figure this out on their own if they're ultimately going to be able to be successful. But I don't know. I've never thought about that perspective before. So I'm just thinking through this on the fly, but I think that's really insightful that you had that, I guess is what I'm saying, because striking that balance between helping them and allowing them to grow that muscle is not easy. And so anyway, so how did you end up finally, did those kind of just fizzle out, or did you just decide to move on, or?
No, they actually, some of them are still active.
Okay.
And, I still am working with some of the ones that are growing and still, very active. Not all of them have been bad. It's just not the business model that
Sure.
Like, it's not how I'm going to spend the next 10 years of my life, is like taking minority positions in these kind of like new startup companies. And I think I can have an influence in different ways. And
totally. So I'm also not surprised to hear that your desire and willingness to influence and serve is still there. I mean, looking back now and kind of just through the part of your life that we covered, like there's a common thread of service there, like you served in the military. It seems like you've taken that kind of approach through there. Am I reading it? Like, is that there? Like, would you say you're service oriented?
Yeah, I would say like servant leadership is definitely a good acronym.
I like that. Okay. I'll go with that. So you learn the lessons from angel investing and you're moving on, and then tell me where that ended up taking you after you're back in the saddle a little bit.
Yeah. So somewhere in that journey of Spring Mobile and Simply Mac, we bought a company along the way called GadgetGuard, which is a mobile accessory brand, making, screen protection products and cases and some other things. We sold that business. So after we sold Spring Mobile and Simply Mac, we sold GadgetGuard to L. Catterton. So Catterton is one of the largest consumer private equity funds in the country.
You could see me thinking like, L. Catterton, do I know that? But
they're widely known and well respected. And anyway, that deal was the last. That was the last business that I owned with all my former partners, and that was a private equity transaction where we did carry back, a note on that piece. So it was cash up front, and then we took some as a seller financing piece. GadgetGuard did not make it through COVID. They sell a lot of their products to retailers who are largely shut, and they were highly leveraged through that transaction, and seemingly couldn't work it out with their bank. So anyway, somewhere during those COVID years, I was a creditor, and the board called and asked if I would come see if we could get GadgetGuard out of Chapter 11, which is not something that I had done in the past, but was an incredible learning opportunity. So I went in and we restructured the GadgetGuard business, so mobile accessory business, and then with a couple of partners, we bought that back in 2021.
Oh, interesting.
So we own a mobile accessory brand now, which has been kind of a fun journey over the last handful of years.
That's interesting. I didn't realize that. So this is the mobile accessory brand that you own now. Is this the name that I wrote down? It's
called Matter. Matter Brands is the name of the company.
From it. Yeah. And so Matter Brands, there's something that stood out to me about Matter Brands when I was researching it, and I wrote this down, so I'm going to butcher it because it's here, but something I wrote down is an idea about Matter Brands was about connecting. It was something about connecting the consumer and the device. I got to find it. Do you know what I'm saying? What I'm reaching out is
Yeah. I mean, I can just tell you why. I'm going to tell you what we're doing with this thing. I mean,
please.
It's look, this is take a lot of risk in a big category. So you can go through, several series or schools of thought on, do you want to create an industry? Do you want to disrupt an existing industry? Do you want to take an industry and reinvent it? Mm-hmm. This is one where we look at mobile accessory as a largely wasteful space, like a tremendous amount of, and I'm talking about environmental waste here. Yeah. It's also a very big industry. So globally, if you look at the number of cases and screen protectors sold, it's tens of billions of dollars. It's a huge market. Yeah. The number of customers is shrinking. So there's fewer people in terms of retail partners to sell to. Just the dynamic of retailers. There's fewer larger retailers today than there were 20 years ago. So we looked at the category and thought, well, one, is there an environmental component? Then the second part is just, what we call wellness. There's a real problem with humans using their tech. And I think everyone knows that addiction problem is leading to lots of other issues. And we want to be in that conversation. So we built a health tech line, and, we built another brand called Matter HT, which is all about human tech.
Oh, cool.
And so, we're really trying to start taking on medically rated blue light, red light, EMF reduction around mobile devices, start having thoughtful conversations around, what is the appropriate amount of tech usage? What can you do if you could do something to protect yourself? Really interesting. These topics they're kind of polarizing. Mm-hmm. They don't need to be, because it's one of those kind of for instance, whether or not the EMF from a mobile device causes harm is controversial. There's lots of work on both sides of this topic. What isn't controversial is there's technology out there that can reduce the EMF by like 75 or 80% and not impact cellular performance. So then the question is, why wouldn't you?
Yeah, why not?
For peace of mind. And those are the sort of kind of opportunities that we see in the market where I'm like, I really think that we can bring some of these products to market in a way that a consumer can have peace of mind around the device. And we're trying to really hammer all three pillars. Like, are our products truly protecting the device at a maximum level? Are we being responsible in the way that we're designing these? And I'm thinking about the environment in mind here. And then can we bring a health component to them or a human tech component? If we can do that, it's fun. It's interesting. It's different. we recognize mobile accessories like a commoditized category. Amazon's eating everybody's lunch, but it's a fun challenge. And I kind of have found over my life that doing meaningful work with people I enjoy has been a source of happiness. So we got a cool team. Part of our acquisition is we bought the world's largest patent portfolio around EMF reduction.
Wow.
We've got some really interesting product partnerships around blue light and making sure that the efficacy of those products work the way they're supposed to. I think last year there was $4 billion of blue light purchases on Amazon, and very few people even know if the products that they bought on Amazon work. So, we think what we see is Matter becoming like a trusted brand in this tech accessory space. Some place that people can go and just know that we've done the work to certify and make sure that it all works. And then we're delivering these at really compelling price points too, which is even more fun.
That's cool. Does this align with another company that I read about? You're working on there was the name of the company is escaping me at the moment, but I was reading about like the blood monitoring and some home devices. Do these things? Yep.
So Matter Brands also distributes some products in the U.S. For health tech companies that are looking for distribution.
Okay.
And the one that you're referencing is called Ultrahuman.
Yeah, thank you.
And their largest competitor is Aura.
Okay.
But they're incredibly thoughtful, have really interesting tech and a really big vision on how they can improve people's health outcomes through, the product set that they have. So Ultrahuman is a partner of ours, and we sell that to some of our big customers. What
are your thoughts on that? Like have you tested any of those, like the blood tracking devices or things in general?
Yeah.
Do you think there's utility there and a future for consumers? And obviously you live in the company enough, but.
No, I do. I mean, I think just in general, something that's important to me is health. And so I think that anytime you can have a data set that helps you do things like sleep better, figure out where you get blood sugar spikes, the things that can cause you to feel fatigued or not as sharp, or, I don't know why that data would not be useful to somebody. All that being said, I think like most things in life, there's a principle of moderation that I feel like gets completely lost.
Yeah.
And, you can get so manic about this stuff that, if you're not in bed by a certain time, you just convince yourself that you're going to have a bad day the next day. And so I think there's an aspect of like remembering that socializing and having fun and doing things that you enjoy is also an important part of health.
Yeah.
And nobody talks about that. It's all about like, make sure you get 8 hours of sleep. Don't ever eat sugar, never eat any processed food, cook everything at home. Microplastics are going to kill you. Don't ever consume any form of alcohol. Like at some point, I do think that socialization is an important part.
Yeah.
And
there's also, to your point of data, like there's also a lot of data. Like people die from being lonely and isolated.
Totally.
Like you gotta have connection. Yeah. And those things happen. Those things are a tool for connection. A lot of things.
That's right. So I do use the products. I like the products. I use a filter of making sure that we're socially active and not over indexing. But for the most part, I think they're really valuable to people, especially if they've never used them.
That's cool. What are the things? Are you into? I'm a gadget. I'm a sucker for a good gadget. What what kind of tools do you use for your own personal health? They don't have, even if they're not necessarily from your own portfolio.
I'm a big believer in daily exercise. So that's simple as just walking, if that's that's your jam.
Yeah, man.
But
do you like the walking meetings? Are you a walking meeting guy, or are you a zone out?
No, I'll go. It depends on the meeting.
Sure.
But yeah, I'd exercise. I try to do something every day. I use an Apple Watch to track that. I haven't found much more effective than that. Software wise, I like to use Strava if I'm mountain biking. For sleep, I use the Ultrahuman product.
Okay.
Which I really like.
What is the Ultrahuman one? I didn't read about
There's
that.
a ring that they have. So they've got a ring solution for sleep, and it does more than sleep, but gives you caffeine windows and a lot of interesting data that I really like.
That is interesting. So the caffeine window, meaning you can take your coffee right now and you're probably not going to impact your sleep later tonight.
That's right.
Oh, that's genius.
Yeah,
that's
that
really
gives you
helpful.
optimal ratings on several things. They've done a really nice job with their interface. And then honestly for sleep, this is, more of an expensive product, but I we use the 8 Sleep product.
Tell me which, I love the 8 Sleep.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's been great. And
it really does make a huge difference, right?
It has helped a tremendous amount. I mean, what has helped me, I think we're just sleeping better with that product. And,
I think so also.
So, and by the way, I have nothing. I don't have any affiliation to 8 Sleep.
Maybe they're going to hit you up.
Yeah. I think they're
8
doing
Sleep,
just
feel
fine.
free to give us a call.
Yeah. I think they're doing just fine at the moment.
Yeah, I think so. I'm a fan of that product too. I've not the newest one, but I have I don't know, from a couple generations or something ago. But yeah. All right. So you're involved with Matter, but you're not. You got a lot going on, man. You're involved with Matter, but you're also running 3 Park, and I just love the name 3 Park. So can you tell us about the name and then what you're involved in with 3 Park?
Yeah, so 3 Park was something that I kind of thought through as I think about the type of work that I want to do this next stage of my life. Honestly, we came up with it while I was over in Europe, but the idea behind 3 Park is I've lived in 3 parks in my life. Trailer Park in my early life in South Dakota, Rose Park, which is really kind of a lower middle income area here in Utah, and then Park City. And it's a kind of like the 3 stages of my journey. And it's a good reminder for me at all times of like where I started and where we are now and how grateful I am for everyone that's helped on that journey. And so, we're building 3 Park as an advisory business primarily and, kind of finding our niche. When I think of 3 Park, the ideal customer for me are the customers that have been the best, or I think had the best outcomes, or is where I play what I would consider like an independent third seat. So, if you get a business coach, like an executive coach and a mentor, not all of those have been hardcore operators.
Yeah.
So if you're the CEO and you really are staring down some tough business decisions or just questioning where you need to go, it's hard to find somebody that has been in that seat. I've done it in private companies, public companies. I've sat on the boards of several of these. If you're a board member, you're not always actively involved, and there's always a conflict between the CEO and the board because there isn't a relationship there of employment. And so that independent third seat is kind of the space where I can float and be really valuable to the CEO, during stressful times and or with the leadership team of a company. And I can also become really valuable to the board because I can make sure that I give an unfiltered perspective on how the team's performing. So that's kind of where I think 3 Park will end up and where it will land. It's for me, it's also about managing my time. So I'm going to take a handful of customers and hopefully work with those handful of customers for a long tenure. This is not like I want to charge hourly and, hustle every 2 weeks for a new gig. So I think where we'll settle is, 2 to 3 customers that I'll work with for hopefully 3 to 5 years. And
that's cool.
Yeah, that's where it'll be.
I like that approach, and that seems to fit. I mean, I don't know anything about anything, but it seems like it fits your personality. And I like that idea of the third seat. And I like the idea that you've separated yourself or differentiated yourself in that way. Okay, look, these are 2 unique places. This is where I can fit. I know I can add value here. So kind of related, something you taught when we were trading emails, you were describing a problem that you were trying to sort out in pretty high level. And you mentioned, hey, there's a problem that I have to solve. And I'm the only one that could solve it, so I know I have to do that. So you also talked about managing your time. You're obviously been intentional about managing your time. How do you know when there's a problem that is one that the one that requires for you to solve it versus something that you can just delegate or something that you should let a founder or an owner or an operator handle on their own for their own growth? I think that's a unique perspective. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
First, I think there's an entrepreneurial instinct, that you have. It's, I'm old enough now that it's the veteran quarterback thing where you understand that there are certain things that really can make or break the company over a longer period of time. And you have to be involved when something arises, and whether it's a key relationship with a partner, an employee, or there's a legacy, a history there that might predate people that are now in charge of the company. You just need to get involved. And, I think that in that particular circumstance, it was some combination of all of it. But, I think identifying the factors that are the most critical to the company's value long-term and making sure that you weigh in. There's nothing more important still than having deeply personal relationships with key partners and employees. And, I think that there's it creates so much buy-in and, alignment. And so I don't ever want to be so far away from something that I can't step back in and make a call if I need to.
So I like that approach. That's also like I'm just gonna leave it at that. I like that approach. That's really good. Something, this is not related, but something I remember that stood out to me was when I was researching here about your offer on the 3Park website for female entrepreneurs who might, need a helping hand. That stood out to me. I was curious if you could give a little insight into, hey, why you see this as a need and opportunity, and why you're willing to, make a little bit of space in one of your buckets for female entrepreneurs.
Yeah. It's a great question. I mean, I'm a girl dad. So Annabelle is 17, little Maddie is 10. Right on. And, obviously they're the apples of my eye. And my main job at this point in life is to make sure that they go be contributing members of society and are thoughtful, contributing citizens. But along the way, I think that I've tried to make space for other females that may not have the same type of mentorship. And I hope that they'll have those opportunities at some point in the future. So, the idea there is there's not enough young female entrepreneurs. It's still, largely dominated by men. And if there are young ladies that are starting companies and they need help, I'm just trying to make some space to give advice. It is free. So, you get what you pay for sometimes, and you have to work around my schedule, but it's cool. I like it. Try to make room for it.
I like that a lot. And I think that's neat, man. And it also goes to what we were talking about earlier with, I think this is just another data point that shows, hey, another data point that shows around your desire and willingness to serve and your focus on giving back. And I just think it speaks to your attitude in general. I think I've seen that here in spades. So thanks for all the insights so far. So I'd love to hear, I didn't do a great job asking through this part along the way, but I'd love to hear if you have some more insights around, just some more context around how we got to where we are, how you got to where you are.
Yeah. Yes. Let me try to frame some of this up.
Please.
I grew up in a family that taught me how to work hard and there were values there, honesty, accountability when we did things we were supposed to do, love, a lot of love in my family. And those are, like formative. And you realize now when I think of my life that those first kind of 14 years or so were so formative to who I am today. Mm-hmm. I've had the advantages. I would say I've had the advantages of disadvantages, and most people don't really know what that means. But what I say about is that, I didn't have affluence. So it gave me the willingness to try things because I had little to lose. I also had parents who I watched work so incredibly hard. And I can't tell you the number of times in my life that work was hard, decisions were hard. I was more tired than I should have been. And I still would get up in the morning and go for a jog and think about the sacrifices my parents made. My dad, his mom died when he was 4. His dad died when he was 12. He's lived on his own since he was 15 years old, put himself through high school, volunteered for Vietnam. What does all that mean? It means that he created an opportunity, a life for me and my siblings that I wouldn't have if he wouldn't have made those sacrifices. So I was able to find a gear that I felt like gave me a competitive advantage. I was willing to work harder than other people. I was willing to try things other people were willing to try. And most of that comes from the fact I didn't have. Well, affluence was really the main thing that was missing. I always felt like I had imposter syndrome. So, even though I had the titles, I've been a perpetual learner. I went to graduate school at Pepperdine from 2006 to 2008. Those were very influential years for me, not because it was traditional business school, but because I learned from an 84-year-old man. I think my first 3 books were The China Study, which is a book on how to eat well. Another book was called Love and Relationships by Dean Ornish, and another one was How to Meditate. And we kicked off our weekend with my first weekend of graduate school with, if you don't learn how to eat well and love the people around you and manage your mind, you're going to die a fat, miserable bastard. So it was like a completely different context to how I started. But then if you fast forward to my health journey, which was a little wild, I relied on that stuff. I learned from it. And then even when I kind of pseudo-retired in 2019 and we started Matter, I went back to school again, went to Kellogg and did the Chief Product Officer program.
Cool.
So I felt like I've always almost had to challenge myself to make sure that I can do the work that I say that I'm doing. So I think there's some complexity still in, me just accepting that at this stage who I've become and that it's good enough, and being content, which is a really hard thing for, I think, high achievers to do.
Yeah.
So that's a work in progress. But, you stand back, I have everything I think most people would dream of. I've got, a marriage of 23 years, 2 daughters, a dog, a really loving relationship with my siblings. My parents are still alive and we spend a lot of time together. And, I've had some good success at work, but I think I'll hang my hat like most people. As you get later in life, money becomes less of a utility, and the relationships that you've forged in your life and the memories that you have are more important. And I'm kind of at that vortex, which is why you see me shifting more towards 3-Park and, the desire to keep track of my time. I feel like I've probably worked a lifetime in the 25 or 30 years that I've been in the workforce, just through the both quantity and kind of like different experiences I've been able to have. So like absolutely grateful, for all the influences that got me here.
That's awesome, man. I think that's a perfect place to call it. I really enjoyed this, man. Thanks for sharing your experience with us. I think people are really, really going to benefit from this and enjoy it. And I think you're spot on in that the amount of work experience crammed, the years are not representative of the work experience, of the life experience that we just heard about just now. Said differently, in the words of Indiana Jones, it's not the years, it's the mileage, right? And you put on some miles over your years. So I appreciate you sharing it with us here today. And this is awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Appreciate it, man.